We are back for another Armchair Imagineering episode. This time is focused on Epcot's iconic attraction, Spaceship Earth. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Hey there, thanks for joining me on episode 210 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. Today's focus is all about updating Spaceship Earth. And I mentioned updating versus improving because I still feel like there are a lot of great things about Spaceship Earth. This is not a podcast where I'm just going to talk about how bad it is or rip on it or say, oh my gosh, they need to have so many updates. There are a lot of great things about the attraction. The goal here, one, is just to have fun and talk about things that, wow, wouldn't it be cool to do that? And it's not just me. What I really enjoy about these episodes is not my ideas. My ideas are fine, but it's really about your submissions, whether it's through email, Twitter, Facebook, audio clips. I've got a lot of them, including some from some former podcast guests, from listeners. And those are what I enjoy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through my ideas fairly quickly, going through the various scenes, and then dive into all of your ideas. So many cool ones, play a bunch of clips. So it's not just me talking. There's going to be a bunch of different participants and familiar voices. Then at the end, I'll kind of summarize what I really want to see in the future from Disney, more on a reality side, where even given all the budget constraints and everything else they're doing, what I think they need to do. Going to try not to make this 5 hours, but it's going to be a good one. Lots to cover, so let's get right to it. Here are our ideas for updating Spaceship Earth. Let's do it. So what does Spaceship Earth need? According to R. Stevens, it needs slime, lots of slime, and a chili dog scent, and Vincent from the Black Hole. Okay, maybe not slime. Could we find a way to get Vincent and old Bob from the Black Hole in there? I think so. I figured it'd be fun to start with that comment from R. Stevens on Twitter, because, it's easy to look at Spaceship Earth and say, we must be very serious with what we do. And hey, that's great. I definitely have some thoughts about the importance of Spaceship Earth and how I do want Disney to respect it and take it seriously. However, it's also nice to sometimes just think about some really weird ways they could do it. But up front, I just have to say, I first went on Spaceship Earth in 1984. I vaguely remember it. I remember the feeling of going on it. An 8-year-old, first thing we went on, the earliest version. Very different, very somber, very serious, very cool. It was all those things, a little scary, a little ominous, but cool. Spaceship Earth has never been a dry history lesson. It's been fun. It shows cool technologies. It really represents to me the best of what Disney can do. When it's been at its best, it's on par with attractions like Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion and Horizons, and other great Disney attractions. It deserves to be in that type of discussion and to be treated that way by Disney, not just as a cool icon you can put lights on, but on the inside, on the same level that Disney treats its classic attractions. We've seen them give love to Jungle Cruise and constantly to Haunted Mansion and Pirates and others. I would like to see Disney treat Spaceship Earth the same way, not as something where you need a sponsor to make an update, but as one of the signature rides and attractions you can experience at a Disney park. And another thing, Spaceship Earth should be like those other attractions I mentioned. It is not a place to try and put in Disney IP. And I know Disney had come up with an idea. And again, it was so vague. I don't even want to be too critical yet of what it was going to be, but related to storytelling, which to me, knowing Bob Chapek and Iger to a lesser extent, felt like a way to get Disney characters from Moana or from other films into the attraction. I tried to be very modern and not think of it in terms of, old man shouting at cloud, we can't have IP. But when you have an attraction, kind of like Journey to Imagination in a way, the original, but an attraction that on its own can be its own thing. That's what I'd like to see from Spaceship Earth. It can be strong enough on its own merits. This type of attraction is still very popular at Disney. It's not totally outdated. Now, granted, there are elements, as we'll get into, of the latest version that seem even more outdated than elements from past versions of Spaceship Earth. But we're going to have some fun with it. We're not going to get too down on what it is now, because a lot of the components to make the best version or a great version on par with the Cronkite and Jeremy Irons versions are still there. Spaceship Earth is not a situation where you're like, man, I don't even know what to do with this. It's like a house that you went in and you're trying to rehab, and then you realize it would have made more sense just to tear it down. That is not the case. Spaceship Earth is the house that just needs to be loved, and then you can flip, to use a really weird metaphor there. But they need to make some changes, but it could be as good as it ever has been. This is something that Parkscope Joe brought up on Blue Sky, actually. At a minimum, we need to upgrade the ride and show systems. Then he said, ideally, update old content and redo load/unload to be more traditional OmniMover to reduce slowdowns. Zoning in on his minimum, that is something that we need to consider. And this is going to be more fun. Like, what do we do to the scenes? But really, what I have noticed at a minimum, the latest. We're not going to stop the show here. Disney needs to work on the building. They need to make the vehicles not sound so creaky. They need to fix the air conditioning because it was really hot the last time we went. They need to work on the lighting and the sound, and all of the basic show elements need to be upgraded. Things have improved a lot since 2007. That's the first thing that Disney needs to work on. But obviously, I don't want them to stop there. But that is something where if Disney really said, hey, we're going to focus on imagination and making that the greatest attraction we ever could, given the popularity of Figment. So we can't do as much with Spaceship Earth, but we're going to close it down for a month before we close Imagination, once the central spine is up, to just update the maintenance. I'd say that's cool. That's a good start. But this attraction is probably going to need to be down for, I don't know how long it takes, but let's say a year. 9 months to a year. Kind of like the updates we've seen to, Mission Breakout, but that was insane, or Test Track 2.0 or something like that. Not a huge time, but enough time to make a difference. But I referenced earlier the storytelling. There was also the whole thing about the power of light, which made me think that Disney was going to do some sort of sponsorship with the lighting company. But really, Disney, don't worry about the sponsor. I know the sponsor might give you some money, and that is important to get your whatever million per year. And that's great for Test Track. That's going to benefit us, hopefully, with the new Test Track. But it's okay to just look at a great attraction and say, let's make this awesome. It makes it more popular. It draws more people to the park. I'm not saying it's going to change attendance dramatically. Okay, you've got this new vision for Epcot. This vision needs to see it, one, new imagination, updated Nemo, but we're focusing today on Spaceship Earth. So let's make this your top attraction at Epcot and one of the best attractions at Walt Disney World. But let's dive into the specifics before I go on for too long just about the ideas, the grand and miraculous ideas. Let's get into the weeds here. To help lead into my ideas, I'm going to turn it over to Shane, a member of the Tomorrow Society, longtime listener. Shane has some thoughts on what needs to be changed and what doesn't, that I think fits well into kind of how I'm going to approach Spaceship Earth. So let's go to some thoughts from Shane.
Hello, this is longtime listener, first-time caller Shane with my ideas for Spaceship Earth. My ideal refurbishment would not seek that many changes. This attraction still embodies the core philosophies of Epcot Center, and I don't really want the whole cave paintings through space travel narrative of early Future World to be removed. In fact, I'm really happy that the leaked concept art for the more abstract storytelling-based refurb seems to be going nowhere. Here's what I want. First off, replacing the track and fixing the air conditioning are givens, but I don't actually want that many substantive changes made to the ride's first half. Sure, they could add some fancy new lighting effects or update some of the audio animatronics, but I still feel like the core experience of the Dark Ride is impactful. For me, reworking the narration takes precedence. It's in desperate need of a rewrite, and I'd love to see a return to something closer to the opening day or Walter Cronkite versions to bring back the Ray Bradbury inspiration and delete all the awkward references trying to sell hard drives. I'm happy to bring Dame Judi Dench back or hire somebody new. It's the content that matters more. I'd also like to remove the entire touchscreen interaction in the ride vehicles. It's super dated and distracting. For me, the most crucial change is putting something, literally anything, up at the apex of the ride, along with sprucing up the reverse trip back to the ground level. Whether you're looking out at the Earth from the moon base or some sort of trippy, abstract glimpse into the distant future of communication, seriously, anything that's visually and sonically compelling would be a huge boon to the ride. Also, the inclusion of a brand new advanced audio animatronic or several up there would be a huge win that would bring a lot of people back to the ride. And the slow descent could benefit from having any interesting visuals. They could bring back some of the weird abstract stuff from that lead concept art or bring back the practical lighting and video effects from the 80s. Hell, anything would be better than what we currently have at the end of the ride. Thank you.
Thanks, Shane. And I think right up front, Shane brings up one of my points, which is I believe the ideas shown on you look at that big mural by Claudio Mazzoli that is still in front of Spaceship Earth with the cavemen and space and everything in between fits well. And right now, with the last version, we are almost on the edge of, are we still focusing on what's in that mural? But I don't think there needs to be a drastic change to do that. It's just that this is not a case where this attraction opened in 1982 and never changed. And what we're looking at is an attraction that is well past its shelf life. But there are elements of it that when it opened, I'll say early 2008, I'm going to call it the 2008 version. I referenced earlier 2007, but that's when they were working on it. But the 2008 version that could use some updates. And there's probably little elements from each version that could either be reincorporated or could start from scratch. Or we could start from scratch. But there's a lot that we can still do. And Shane also mentioned it. I think the touchscreens don't need to be a part of this attraction. And yes, it was fun, especially at the very beginning when they had these touchscreens. Like, oh, wow, we get to answer. They actually had, I think, trivia at the very beginning, from what I remember. Or we get to tell them what we like, and then they'll create something. And, oh, isn't this cool? It doesn't seem that long ago, but 15 years ago, smartphones were not nearly as much a part of our lives as they are now. I think they existed, but I didn't get my first smartphone until a few years after that. Now, I was kind of a late adopter on that, so I don't want to use myself as the best example. But it shows that things changed a lot in the years after that version of Spaceship Earth. So when we have these supercomputers in our pockets, getting to sit on a ride and press a few buttons and see a silly animated video, yes, it can be funny and generate a few laughs, but it is not something that needs to be in the flagship at a Disney park. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First of all, yes, I think the touchscreens do not need to be on the vehicles. And I want to focus first on the entryway. I remember being young and there was this idea, especially the first version, but even after, like, this is your time machine vehicles and you are going back in time. So I don't want to turn this into Dinosaur when you're like, oh my gosh, it's so intense, we're going back. But I do like the idea of getting on the vehicle and no, don't take my picture. I don't need that. We don't need any of that. That whole area is more the transition from being in Epcot to going back in time. So you've got the smoke that used to be part of it. You have some audio effects. You just have a few small effects, but right away it gets us in the right mood of being in this attraction and going on this journey rather than still kind of feeling a bit at a distance from everything. I want us to feel more engaged in it. And part of that is adding in that element where it's like, okay, we are traveling somewhere. We are going on, not an adventure, but we're having an experience. And that's where I think, you think about that first scene with the cavemen, where if you're able to make that feel a little more ominous, the entry into that, not to scare anyone, but to feel like that whole idea where they say, we are alone. That idea, but taken to the extreme where as riders, we're starting to feel that way. And it transitions us into the experience from there. Now, future scenes are not going to feel this way. I don't want everything to be scary, but feels a little ominous, feels a little awkward, feels like we're doing something different. And whether it's through additional projections or environmental effects, or even maybe making it feel a little cold, there are ways you can kind of generate that feeling from that early scene and do it in a really interesting way as you start the attraction. I mean, if you look at the script from Judi Dench in that version, this is her line. Here in this hostile world is where our story begins. We are alone, struggling to survive until we learn to communicate with one another. Those first lines, we need to feel that. We need to feel this is hostile. And yes, they've done some cool things with the 2008 version, with the projection effects and the animatronics and all that improvement to make it seem a little better. But there's more they can do to generate that. That's a perfect example where instead of and that's where things like, the crankiness of the machines or the overall vibe or the fact that it's not cold and it's got a warm, these are all distractions that we don't need in the best Disney attractions. We want to have this feel as strong as ever, and I think that's something that we really need to focus on with these scenes. But I want to stop now and also mention the narrator, because this is a big point. Like, we have this comment from Jason Buck on Twitter, which this is his full to-do list, but I'm going to zone in on one part of it. Update Walter Cronkite narration with AI. Restore the space station, fix the descent, make it more engaging, scrap the fancy 2000 touchscreen gimmicks. That's going to be a common trend. But I want to go back to the first thing he said, which is update Walter Cronkite narration with AI. Now, I don't love the idea of using AI, much for most things. Now, though I know it probably plays a role in things that I'm not even aware of, but I'm a little hesitant on that. One of my ideas for the narration is to get all the various narrators and have it be more of a collection of narrators, not one. And also possibly adding someone new. People also mentioned Morgan Freeman, who I think is a good example in a lot of ways. Or I think of others that have, authority, like a Helen Mirren or Kate Blanchett or Viola Davis. There's a lot of people that have strong voices that could fit with this. But then I like the idea of maybe mixing in those new narrators with past narrators and past lines. Now, Jay focuses specifically on Walter Cronkite, where you're updating it with AI. If done well, that could be interesting, because that was always my hesitation. One was about the rights issues. Would you be able to get Jeremy Irons and, Walter Cronkite? I don't know how much you would use from the Vic Perrin version, which appears to now be confirmed, rather than Lawrence Dobkin. And then Judi Dench. Judi Dench and Jeremy Irons are still alive, so it's not like they couldn't record more. But you have a variety of narrators. Then you also have different voices, and you have different things that each one is focusing on. There's a lot they can do there. You could also just have a new narrator or possibly two narrators to then summarize it. We just have to be careful that we don't go down the trick of what's happened with the last version where you try kind of make it stupider. I don't know. It almost feels like stupider is a dumb word, but that sort of fits with a few things. Not everything from the Judi Dench narration is a problem. There's just a few elements that could really use help. I like the idea overall, too, of Disney finding a way to make sure this version of Spaceship Earth does not get dated in a few years, and also sort of pays tribute, and to make this the best version, not a nostalgia trip only, but the best version overall of the attraction by looking both to the past and changes to the future with the latest technology there too. It's almost like you're going in both directions. You're going backwards and forwards with what you're doing. And that's what I really appreciate, because that's kind of what Spaceship Earth does. It looks back to the dawn of recorded time, to the very beginning, but then also looks forward, at least it did look forward in other versions, to the potential of technology going to space, connecting how we communicate. There are a lot of elements to that too. Now, as we kind of roll through Spaceship Earth, you have the Egyptian scene, which I do want to bring up here as the creation of written language. For me personally, I find this scene to be pretty strong. Yes, you could make a few updates to the audio and video and everything else of the scene, But I feel like this scene is pretty strong. They gave some good updates with lighting and everything else to the 2008 version. So there was not a lot more we need to do at that point. There's some really good transitions. I love the feeling of perspective from the walls that you pass on the right side of the vehicle. But there is something that's funny that Bethany Bemis pointed out. Bethany Bemis was a podcast guest. We talked about her book, Disney Theme Parks and America's National Narratives, and the Smithsonian exhibit, Mirror, Mirror, Reflections of American Disney Parks. But Bethany had kind of a fun call out that I hadn't really thought too much about, but I enjoyed a lot. I will read her full comments, but then zone in. I love Spaceship Earth. I love the slow-moving break from the Florida heat and pounding the pavement. I love the idea that we're all in this spaceship together with a shared responsibility to chart our future course. I do think some of the animatronics could be tightened up. The several-inch gap between the ancient Egyptian pounding reed into a papyrus tool and the reeds he's supposed to be pounding always makes me laugh. While Spaceship Earth actually does what I think is a decent job attempting to cram thousands of years of history into 10 minutes, I hope that future iterations can widen from the very Western lens the current story takes to look at some of the contributions made towards our collective progress from the Eastern world, which really doesn't factor into the current story with the exception of their creating the first backup system. Well, first I wanted to point out, since we are at the Egyptian scene, I did appreciate a lot her call out of the unknown Egyptian making paper and not actually hitting the paper, which I hadn't really noticed, but it is something where like maybe they could make a few tweaks to that. If it's something that she's noticed and others I've heard talk about it, it feels like a small tweak, but those little changes add to the believability. But also in this similar space here, we do have the focus then on the Phoenicians and on the Library of Alexandria later, and everything going on with that. But it is primarily from a Western perspective. So I think there are changes we can do. Now, granted, I'm kind of looking at this more as not a huge update. So how far are we going to go with the story? This might be as much from the narration and possibly just the perspective we present. But I thought it was interesting because no one else brought that up, trying to focus less on a Western perspective and more on a Eastern or even just broader global perspective. I found very interesting from Bethany. And really, there are multiple places. Bethany references the first backup system. That is something where I do feel like Disney needs to shore up the script a bit. It's weird because Thank the Phoenicians has become this phrase that everybody likes to talk about, and it goes on t-shirts and everything else. Let's all thank the Phoenicians. And people enjoy that. But there's a fine line between something like that, where it's, again, I even feel like it's a little pandering, the whole, remember how easy it was to learn your ABCs? It's like, really? Come on, That leads not nearly as bad as the whole Rome was the first World Wide Web, which to me is the worst one. Worst one. Not something I enjoy. And then later, the first backup system. It's like, okay, this relates to when Siemens was the sponsors. It's not good. Even her reference to, unfortunately, taxes when talking about Egypt. Yeah, we don't need to try and connect with me as a modern person here. Let's just focus on the history and everything they did. We don't need to try and put in these little extra things. And I know Judi Dench did not write this script. I'm not saying Judi Dench is doing it, but that's something extra there that I think, regardless of what ends up happening with the narration, I really like my idea of mixing it up. You got to find the right tone. And I do think with Judi Dench's version, they tried to kind of adjust the tone to make it more familiar and friendly, whereas the Jeremy Irons version, Walter Cronkite was a little bit like, I'm Walter Cronkite and I'm a newsman, I'm an expert, but I'm kind of like you, but I know my stuff and I care. Jeremy Irons was a little more, I'm going to be up in the clouds, but we're going to talk about these big issues and theatrical and, Babel and everything, not Babel, the tower or the movie. I'm talking about, they talk about that stream of endless babble, I think is what he talks about later. Some big issues. And then we kind of shifted. I think we went from Jeremy Irons, we threw it too far the other direction, where then you have kind of Judi Dench just talking down to us a little bit. So I would say there are things we can do to adjust this pretty quickly. I am fine with the Phoenician scene staying as is. Through all of these scenes, though, I would like to see updates to reflect. You saw what's happened like in the stretching room of the Haunted Mansion. I would like to see updates to make the sound quality be just top notch. There have been a lot of changes in 15 years. The visual quality, I think, needs to improve. But these scenes are all pretty sharp. You can make updates to the animatronics. You can make small changes, which I'm going to talk about in a minute with the next scene. But as we go through, what they did, they focused quite a lot in the 2008 version with the updates to the theater is born section with that particular animatronic. And I would like to see a few more animatronics, whether it's in the Egyptian scene or the Roman scene and everything, reach this same level. This change, they did a very good job with the lighting in this scene, with the changes that if you look back at the way people were sitting there and just looking, the way everything looked before, it looks like it's so much more basic. There are really cool changes you could do to to other scenes to line up. Because that's the thing with Spaceship Earth. You want it to feel seamless, where each scene has kind of these animatronics and lighting and audio that all kind of matches together. What you don't want to do is spend a bunch of time updating one or two scenes and then have other scenes that seem completely out of place, which we will get to later. But let's move on to Rome. And, this is the most like fan service thing ever, but they should put the chariot back in. Put the visual of the chariot back in. Removing that was just silly. If you haven't ridden anything but the most recent version, you wouldn't know about this, but there was a very simple repeated image, a film projection of an animated chariot going through the background repeatedly, while in the Jeremy Irons version, he talked about how all roads led to Rome. It was a simple visual, but unlike something like Judi Dench saying Rome made the first World Wide Web, it doesn't call attention to itself. It's just very subtle, and it's fun. It's a fun little visual gag. It's a fun visual moment that everyone remembered. It was like a signifier, like, oh, we're at Disney World. We're at Epcot. We get to see the fun chariot. I don't know what it is. It's kind of like those smells, like the smell of oranges on horizons or anything that just kind of like are things that you experience over and over, especially when you're a kid at Disney World, that when you go on a ride that generally seems pretty similar and it's not there, you're like, wait, why is that gone? It's like all those effects. People are like, why do they make such a big deal about smoke coming out of the train on Expedition Everest? Or, so many other effects that are small, but they feel wrong when they're not there. It's one of those things, really, if Disney fixed all the maintenance and then just added the chariot, which what I've heard is still there. Of course it is. Why would they remove it? They just leave everything. Is still there. Right there, everyone would be like, hey, good job, Disney. It's like when they added the animatronics to the end of Grand Fiesta Tour. It's like, this is the greatest thing. Recently added projection effects to Muppet Vision 3D. They're surprises. They're fun. This is a nostalgic callback, but it still fits in the ride. It wouldn't be out of place. And to me, changes like this also add a little extra kind of depth or fun, weirdness, nerdiness, whatever you want to call it. Just a little bit of something extra. You're like, I really like that moment when you have that in the background. It's just like, oh, that's kind of clever. And there's no need to remove things like that. I think the story was one of the producers for the version said, oh, it's cheesy. Let's get rid of it. Oh, come on, Disney. Come on, Disney. But speaking of things staying and never going away and all of that, here I'm going to take a short break here and play this clip from Carly Wiesel, who is back now doing new episodes of Very Amusing. Lots of fun guests, and, she has her churros hotline. It gets a bunch of great questions and just has a cool attitude and very energetic. Writes a lot of stories as a journalist, but also does a fun podcast. Very into Duffy and Friends, which I enjoy given all the conversations, including my recent one with Greg Combs that I've had about Duffy. But here's a quick clip from Carly, which isn't really about a change to Spaceship Earth. It's more about something that she would like to enjoy or experience in the attraction, which is not normally offered. So here is Carly.
Hi, Dan. Okay, So my approach for what they should do in updating Spaceship Earth is a little bit unconventional because I am willing to give Walt Disney Imagineering full free range to do whatever they want to this attraction, which I love, so that's saying a lot. I'm going to let them do whatever they want so long as they let me ride Spaceship Earth with the lights on. Just one time. Just one time. I mean, they could have a blowout ticketed event, charge me $159 like it's a Christmas or Halloween party. You know what I mean? Let me ride it with the lights on before you change it. I think there'd be a huge audience for this, especially if they put everyone's phones in bags, no cameras, nothing. Just you and the memory of riding Spaceship Earth before they redo it with the lights on. I know things are not pretty inside that ride with the lights on, which is exactly why I want to see it in all of its carnal glory. It's got to be hideous. Absolutely hideous without the tarps and without everything. So please let me ride it with the lights on one time. I will pay a pretty penny. You don't even have to give me an AP discount. Then do whatever you want to the attraction. Got it? Sure. Just let me see it once with the lights on, please. That's my ask. And they would make so much money. They could easily fund at least redoing one scene in that attraction. Though even the thought of them redoing it makes me very, very sad. But makes me happier to think that I maybe see it with the lights on. Okay, that's all I got. I miss you. Thanks. Okay, bye.
Thanks, Carly. I think, though, this brings up a great point, which is just how crazy it is that there's actually an attraction inside Spaceship Earth. But also, I think I remember I think it was for the 30th anniversary, if I remember correctly, where the Retro Disney World guys, when it might have been 35 actually, did a tour where they were able to walk through the inside of Spaceship Earth and how crazy that was. I would love to do that. And the lights on would be a great compromise too, if they don't want us climbing around the inside to get to see it. I think it might be a little frightening. It might also show just how on top of each other these scenes are and how much it's owed to the lighting and sound and everything else. I would love to get a close look at that kid who's facing the wall, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I played this now too, because if you think about it, like things like from what I've heard on The Descent, the sets are still there. The chariot is still there. There's a lot that Disney has not used. The space station is still there. And I'm going to talk as we move up through this. I would like to see Disney find ways to use some of these things. Don't just make it dark. Don't cover it with a scrim. Let's use it. And another way, yes, I love Carly's idea behind the scenes. I would kill to do that and would love to do a lot of behind the scenes tours they actually offer currently. But this would be something super fun and a cool special event that people could enjoy. And then, of course, you get to the end and they have food, they do the whole thing. You bring in maybe even some people that worked on Spaceship Earth. There's a lot of neat things they could do there. Do this. If Retro Disney World, if this has to be a retro magic event, let's do it. I would make it out for this one. But focusing more back in on Spaceship Earth, I think that it just shows how much history there is to this attraction and how much that could still be used. Maybe not with the lights on, but just as we move forward in the attraction, there is so much that could be used going to the future. All right, we've now moved on to where the future is saved. We have not lost all the books, but this is where we need to remove the first backup system line. You think about what some of the other narrators said. You had this amazing description from Jeremy Irons, but all was not lost. For far across the land, from Cairo to Cordoba, Jewish teachers and Islamic scholars continued the quest for knowledge. In libraries of wisdom, they debated ideas and shared new discoveries with all who would listen. And then we have this great line from the very first one. Far from the dying embers, Islamic wise men preserve ancient wisdom and weave a rich network of new knowledge linking East and West. Now, I know they've made changes to say, instead of Islamic, to say Arab and everything else. I don't want to dig into that, but I'm just saying the wording and what was used compared to, let's do the first backup system. I'm sorry, there's no narrator that can sell that to me. But I really like the effects they made with some of the sets and with the lighting here. Basically, I have no notes. And then as we move forward, I also love the sleeping monk. Disney, do not touch the sleeping monk. I still think of my dad laughing so hard every time we saw the sleeping monk. It was a hit. No notes on that. Just perfect. We've now moved into the Renaissance, and I just think Disney needs to find some way to, remember when Walter Cronkite was like, behold the majesty of the Sistine ceiling. And then you look up and you're like, there's not that much there. An interesting note what they did for 2008 is actually switch the paintbrush to Michelangelo's right hand, which actually isn't historically accurate, but allowed you to see his face better, which I enjoyed hearing about. That was from Neil Engel, who was an art director, passed that along. But I don't have a lot of changes to this, but I do think this is one of those scenes where I feel like the idea of showing Michelangelo working on the Sistine ceiling after he already passed the printing press, which I like that scene a lot, is could use some help there. There's a little more we could do to make the Sistine ceiling really stand out and just be something super special. Then we move on to the age of invention. Oh wow, things are getting exciting. But then we get to our boy. I don't know why, but the boy is not facing the right direction. I'm not sure why. It's just weird. I think he's designed to be facing the wall and giving things away. But again, according to Neil Engel, the executive producer didn't like the boy and moved him away. That's fine. If you want to remove him at all, that makes some sense. But the way it is now, they need to address it in some way. I always thought the boy's voice was a little jarring, so it still kind of is. But you need to address him because it stands out too much. You go through the scene and you keep going, wait, why is that boy facing the wall? So there needs to be some fix to that too, just to continue to find little adjustments. I do feel like they did spend a lot of focus on this, so there aren't a lot of things you really need to do. As you move to the top, all I can say is Disney needs to make sure the TV is working, because when that TV is not working, you could say, oh, it's a minor thing that the TV for the moon landing isn't working. It's ridiculous. When it's not working, you're like, wait, what? Why is this not working? So little things like that. I don't know what Disney needs to do, but there are too many times when things like that aren't working. And it's really hard to really want them to make too many changes to this next scene, which is the computer room scene. I mean, they made a lot of updates from when they had a simpler form with just the desktop computer. And then even they had what I thought was a clever effect where you had the person talking with someone from Japan and laying down. That was a pretty good version in 1994. But overall, I think that the computer scene has a lot of vibrance and is still something that connects directly to us today. So I wouldn't see a lot of changes need to be made to that area. If I was going to focus on it, you can make a few tweaks. Any of these areas that I've talked about recently, I mentioned earlier about updates to animatronics. I still think that's something I would like to see wherever possible. Even in this computer room scene, there are things you could do there. But I know animatronics are really expensive, so I want Disney to focus on the areas that seem to not be as good. The Renaissance animatronics look older than these ones from the computer room scene, so I think it is something that might not be needed as much. So as we reach the top, I think this is a good moment to read a comment from Martin Smith. You know him as the man behind Martin's Vids. If you are a fan of Epcot or Walt Disney World or anything, especially history, but also just seeing a lot of extinct attractions and new attractions, check out martinsvids.net or his channel on YouTube. He actually recently just did a new edit of the 1982 version of Spaceship Earth, which there isn't a lot of info out there. Martin does awesome work. But let's read. I'm going to read his whole comment, but then zone in on why I'm talking about it here. Spaceship Earth, where to begin? Firstly, the ride system needs attention. It needs serious work on the track and motor system before it's too late. Then the overall content. No IP. For the love of God, no IP. Keep it original. Keep it semi-mature. The ride works perfectly with narration describing each scene. The scenes all still work well. Some TLC maybe, but they're still wet at its best. If the Matrix tunnel stays, shorten it. It sticks into the 180 too much. 180 top, the jewel in the crown. Reduce the brightness of the Earth. It's too bright and illuminates the dome interior too much. Ditch the blue lights. Give us more satellites in the space station again. Obviously, it was such an awe-inspiring sight to drift amongst the satellites and fall backwards into the station. Naturally, the LCD screens will all be removed. Bring back actual show scenes, or even better, the abstract style of multiple visual effects pre-1994 that act as a real finale. And of course, we need a stirring orchestral score. Now, there's a lot that Martin covers there, some that I'm going to cover in the future, but I want to talk now about the Matrix tunnel, which I didn't think about, but the fact is, it does kind of cut off part of your view. He calls the 180 top, that's the sphere at the top where, you've reached the crowning achievement. I have a lot of notes about this section. Beyond the descent, I think this is the second area that Disney could focus on the most. And I think he brings up a great point where when you get up there, the Matrix tunnel, while kind of a nice transition scene, cuts too far into it. I don't know if we even need it at all, but if you do, make it much shorter. And then also, I have found that this scene, as you come out into the sphere, could use some help. I feel like, there's a variety of approaches you could take to it, but I do feel like you need to do something because everything is leading to this moment, to the point that we are all passengers on our spaceship Earth. And okay, the Earth floating by, it's effective, but it's always, every version, this has always seemed a little muted to me, seeing the Earth flying by. I think Martin brings up a great point, the fact that it's too bright, and you want this scene to seem dark. You want to feel like you're in outer space. The fact of the matter is that because with the space station being covered, that you can see those scrims so well, and you can see everything around you, means it's going to take you out of it a bit, and it's not as sharp as it should be. Many people have talked about this, but the early versions of this attraction included a space station, a physical set of a space station. Go back and watch. Go to Martin's vids and watch this. There was actually, you could see that there were people on it. And then you also had these satellites floating by. You had an astronaut floating by on the screen. There was a lot to look at. It was impressive. It was powerful. It fit where it's like, okay, we are going through each stage of communication. In this version, we're going past computers and the development of computers. And we're talking, earlier we had shown the astronauts go to the moon, but now the next step is communication through satellites, but also viewing our Earth and our connection and our connectivity from space. And the fact of the matter is that we have people that are on a space station, now, obviously the International Space Station, but for a while have been living up in space. You had the astronaut who's now a senator, who lived for a year in space and found ways to connect. There's a really good documentary and book about this. Connectivity has gone beyond just the Earth itself and gone out into outer space, but also from this view, we can look at our Earth and just see it's grand, it's miraculous, and it's kind of amazing that we all live in this place. How do you convey all those things, Disney? One is the physical set of the spaceship adds so much more to this scene. And as you turn backwards and can look up at it and look at everything we're seeing, it's really powerful. Right now, you get to the top like, oh, that means all we have left is this and then the screens. No, you never want to feel that way when you still have a third of the attraction. There are so many things you can do. And that's where Disney, like I mentioned earlier with the Chariot, by keeping things, yes, it might have been cheap and they might be run down and they might need to be updated, but they may have done themselves a favor where if they're not starting from scratch. They can make updates right there that can make it super special. And speaking of connectivity and the overall message of Spaceship Earth, I'm going to play a clip now from Josh Fenton of the Marty Called podcast. These guys, Tim and Ben and Josh, they dig into both recent news, but also especially do a lot of armchair Imagineering like this, and their concepts often go much further. It's not as simple as just we're going to update an attraction, but they have a lot of fun episodes. You should definitely check it out. We're going to have Ben and Tim coming later if you're a fan. But let's start with Josh, because I think this fits with the themes of where we are at this point at Spaceship Earth. So here is Josh Fenton.
Hey, Dan, this is Josh from the Marty Called podcast. I really hope you and your listeners are doing well. And I want to thank you for giving me a chance to talk about my thoughts on modernizing Spaceship Earth. I was actually pretty excited when you asked me to contribute to this segment because, as anyone who's listened to our show knows, I've definitely struggled with enjoying most of the changes that have happened to Epcot over the last few years. I miss what that park originally represented. To me, as a child, it was a place where optimism reigned and where there was really no limits on what individuals could achieve and what society could achieve when individuals worked together instead of against each other. And it's hard for me to not consider now how Spaceship Earth, even in the 80s, really did do a marvelous job of embodying the sort of ideals that the company is so passionate about right now. And I think reasonable people can disagree about how well Disney has succeeded in integrating the notions of inclusivity into their attractions. And certainly the company's trying to balance being popular with a large audience with this sort of corporate social responsibility dedication to diversity and inclusiveness. But it's hard for me to imagine anything more than the metaphor of us all existing on a spaceship together, which is the Earth, that brings us more together. And I think that even in 1982, that ride did a great job of that. Now, granted, it focused primarily on the technology, no doubt as a result of the fact that it was, the Bell system that was the sponsor. But the reality of it is the technology is secondary to the influence and the effect that it has on the lives of people and on society, whether it's allowing for dating or romantic relationships to happen over long distances, or keeping family members in touch as they travel, or allowing people to care for their families by working at home through the use of technologies like Zoom and the other 900 different sort of video conferencing services that exist now. And I think the only thing that Spaceship Earth really needs to do is be properly maintained and to have that descent scene renovated, not just focusing on the technology, but on the incredible degree to which technology has empowered lives to be better. And really, I think the value proposition of Spaceship Earth is the idea that we are having this shared experience as humans on Earth. And maybe it will take us truly discovering intelligent life elsewhere to gain the sense of unity that we clearly lack as a planet. But certainly, I can't think of a better place than Epcot. And with an Epcot, I can't think of a better attraction than Spaceship Earth to really drill down on the idea that if you stop listening to the news and you just talk to your neighbors, whether they be near or far, that at the end of the day, we all have a lot in common and the world can be a pretty great place.
Thanks, Josh. I think that's a really interesting point just about Spaceship Earth's role. It may have changed a bit over the years just with, well, one, how Epcot has changed and how, where Epcot had a bunch of attractions that had sort of a familiar, similar theme in that way. We're looking to the future. We're optimistic about the future. We're all in this together. We're looking to the past, and then things in the future are going to be pretty great in these various areas, where a lot of them aren't the same, like World of Motion, Horizons, Universe of Energy are all gone. So now we have Spaceship Earth here. And I think as we're looking kind of at the overall vibe of the attraction, I like that. I think that it's toned down a bit with the Judi Dench version, just with kind of the weirdness of some of the lines. And then, of course, with the descent and with the very old-looking videos to put your face on it and everything else, which are kind of funny. And again, my daughters have enjoyed them in the past, but just don't really hit on that. And I think that leads us really well into thinking about as we start to head down to the descent. Because, the top part, like I said, I would love to see them bring back the space station in some form, improve the effects, to do something to make it wow you. Like you're looking forward the whole time to, I can't wait till we get to the top where we can see that and then turn around and go backwards. Where right now it's like, not as thrilling, like I mentioned earlier. But two, I always remember as a kid being just like, when you turn backwards, just thinking like, wow, this is really cool. And granted, rides weren't as sophisticated then. You didn't have all these rides that just threw you forward and backwards and did all these crazy things. But just the idea of like, okay, we're going forward, now we're going to go backward, and then we can see all these things as we kind of lean back and look up, and there's a lot to see and enjoy. It's not just like we go backwards and there's a bunch of lights flickering and then we look at our screen. There's a lot more happening, whereas the top point is not basically the end of the excitement. It's essentially the, 2/3 point. Or you can call it the climax, but basically the part where it's impressive and the high point, but it doesn't mean that then after that you just kind of like, can we just get to the end? Can we just get out of here? No, there's still a lot more there. And a lot of the comments that all of you sent were about the descent for sure. And here's just a quick comment from Ryan Ritchie. Ryan has been on the show 3 times. He was actually my first interview guest talking about his film After the Fair. And then we also talked a lot about projection mapping and things going on there. And then finally, we most recently talked about his theme park trivia show, which is a very fun YouTube show. I was also a guest on there where it's just trivia and 2 people, sometimes multiple people compete. And it's just a great time. So let's dive into Ryan's comment. I wish something fresh could be added to the ending descent. I'm happy with just about everything else, and I get nervous when there's talk of updating this attraction. I can't think of any attraction that got updated had more animatronics after the update than before. Let's let this one maybe stay as a tribute to what Epcot once was. Maybe we should think of Spaceship Earth as a carousel of progress of Epcot these days. Okay, so carousel of progress probably use an update too, so maybe that's a bad example, but any updates should be in keeping with the traditional themes of the attraction and done with a light hand. However, this attraction is unique in that you have the whole descent that can be updated and very little would be lost. Yeah, see, that's a big point there from Ryan, is that if they update the descent, it's not like, I mean, I'm sure, I don't want to say no one, but it's not like a lot of people would be like, oh no, really, this was my favorite part. Yeah, I'm not saying no one, but it's not as common. This is the area you could really zone in on. And that's what I'm going to talk about briefly here. There's a lot more comments that I want to get to, but I think I'm going to leave most of those for when we actually get to the bottom. And I don't want to just, again, this is kind of the theme of how I look at theme park attractions. I never just want to say, just put back in what was there before with no changes. Because to me, one, it's lazy, two, it's going to look dated, and people are like, well, why did you do that? I mean, there are exceptions, like I thought when the original Tiki Room came back, that was really cool to see versus Under New Management, which I know has its fans. But here, I feel like you could have a situation where you bring back a lot of those physical sets. Now, granted, I am sure there needs to be updates that can be made. Rather, they've worn down. I mean, you think about the last time those sets were used was in 2007. So it's been a while. I mean, we're looking at 16 years, and by the time this got updated, probably 17. So my thought is, though, you start there. What do we have here? Let's do a quick look. Let's look at everything we have. Do these animatronics work? What can we do? Update the screens. But the overall theme of looking to the future, because, they had things like a futuristic city, and there was a lot there that still seems futuristic now. Also had great music. Though here, I think what you could do, I mean, I love that da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Now, granted, that doesn't fit with the rest of it, but I think you could use some of that as a callback to the Jeremy Irons version. But also, too, I really would like to see Tomorrow's Child return in some form. Now, I don't know if they would do the original or if they could re-record it. I know they re-recorded part of it for Epcot Forever. Don't really want to use that version. You could bring in Tomorrow's Child, and it would still fit with the rest of the ride. And that's where, like I mentioned with narration, where I feel like the Walter Cronkite intro for Tomorrow's Child is really strong. And if there was a way to use that, I mean, I know you don't want to confuse people, like, why are 4 or 5 different people talking to me? But if you do it throughout the attraction, people will get used to it. And granted, you say Tomorrow's Child also fit because it had those kind of images of kids playing and those kind of foggy images and stuff. I don't really want to go back to that. So you get a little bit into, well, what works and what doesn't, because that descent, you had voices of people talking and everything. So I'm okay if they don't have Tomorrow's Child. I just think a great way to pay tribute to an earlier version, even if you're going to make a lot of changes to the section, would be to use that song, which to me still embodies not only the theme of Spaceship Earth, but the theme of Epcot Center on the whole, and a theme that I think could still be a part of Epcot, even with IP and everything else, especially through this attraction. So that's where I don't expect Disney to do this. I think Epcot Forever was kind of their test on some of these songs, and I know people are still kind of on Epcot Forever. Use the sets, bring in projection mapping. Oh, Disney, you may have to update some animatronics. Some of these were mostly almost static figures, though. But just when you have an attraction like this, it's like if you can imagine something like Pirates of the Caribbean at Disneyland, which is a longer one, and you got about 75% through, and then there were no more animatronics. You'd be like, what's the deal? Where'd everything go? Or where'd the ghosts go on Haunted Mansion? Or, whatever. Like in the cemetery, all of a sudden you were just looking at a screen and seeing ghosts. To me, this is an audio animatronics heavy attraction. That should be the way this attraction is, basically from start to finish. So you can say, which physical sets or what did the approach? There should be more animatronics on the descent. And because they still have those sets, according to everything I know, there should be something maybe they could use. I don't know if the animatronics are useful, but use the backdrop. Use whatever you can, and then continue to update it for for this century. Continue to look ahead. I'm not asking Disney to predict exactly what the future is going to be. There are ways to show things, like you don't want to be like, here's exactly what a phone will be, or here's how we communicate. But there are ways where you could easily show people communicating in some way, whether it's through some video screen or if you wanted to try holograms or just show futuristic cities that are not going to look out of date in the next 10 years. If you get too specific, and that's where sponsors can become a problem. You get too specific and the sponsors want to show certain technologies, that's where it gets out of date. But if you keep it a little broader and just think about possibility, potential, public transportation, that's something we can never think of, whatever, you can make it still seem less dated. Today, not everything can be perfect, but the overall vibe, nothing's going to feel as dated as the videos that they have that, people have aptly compared to a jib-jab card. Nothing's going to be on that level. So that's where I think the attraction can finish strong, because the last thing you want to do is have people, it's almost like people want to get out their phones and just kind of say, okay, what are we getting next with Genie Plus or something during this part? Once they've ridden this attraction enough. No, we want it to be like, I love this part. There's great music, there's cool sets, everything else, let's do this. I think that Spaceship Earth, I don't know, I'd say it's like a B plus attraction overall. There's, I still give it an A or an A minus for the ascent. The top part, like a B, and then the descent is like a C minus. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's fallen down. So I think it would not take that much. It's kind of like when your grade in school is a B plus, and they say, if you do well on the final, you'll get an A. If Disney could do well on the descent, this attraction could get an A. And if Disney, the question is, does Disney really care? Do they want their top flight attraction? Because updating Spaceship Earth, while getting more interest and drawing more people to that attraction, will not have a gargantuan impact. It's not like bring in Cosmic Rewind or Ratatouille. Of course, it should cost less to update this than to bring in those. But if Disney wants to sell Epcot as a must-visit destination that you will pay X dollars for, the iconic attraction of the park should be top-notch. And I know you get into kind of challenges there with Hollywood Studios. What's the iconic attraction there? But like Kilimanjaro Safaris, that needs to be top-notch. At the Magic Kingdom, that's where you kind of have a bunch of them. But the big attractions, whether it's Pirates, Haunted Mansion, Space Mountain, Jungle Cruise, those need to be top-notch. Same thing with Spaceship Earth. So I know we're nearing an hour, so I just want to really dive in now to a bunch of ideas that all of you had. Let's do a quick one here from Painter Vision, because it's quite different than most of the other ones. Heard this one on Blue Sky. Painter Vision said, I'm torn. A new script/narrative is needed, plus a real finale and post-show. At the same time, whatever you do with it is going to be divisive. And I would love to see what they could do if given a proper budget to gut the building and start from scratch. I know it's a problematic idea, but the front half of Epcot would be perfect to apply, wait for it here, the Marvel rights to, if they ever get to wrangle them from Universal. Besides, the STEM tie-ins could give that area a real boost of energy it's been missing for years, and an excuse to spend big again. Modern Disney doesn't spend big without an IP attached, and even when they have a big IP in Epcot like Nemo or the canceled Play Pavilion, results can be mixed. At the same time, it can't keep Band-Aid fixing it forever and expect guests to keep getting excited for the same stuff year after year. Well, I appreciate this, and it doesn't surprise me that much that we're hearing this. Typically, when I talk about updating any area or attraction, Marvel always gets mentioned. Now, I have a few thoughts here. I don't have a strong concern if they wanted to take the old Wonders of Life Pavilion and put Marvel involved with it. If they got the rights or if they didn't and they found ways around it, we've heard about Wakanda, other different choices there. Because then you have kind of over in that same area, you've got Guardians of the Galaxy and you've got the Play Pavilion. It fits to have that Marvel area over on the left. And then on the right, you've got, all the nature attractions in a way with the land, with the living seas, and with Journey of Water. But with Spaceship Earth, it's different for me. I don't want any Marvel involved with Spaceship Earth, because Disney hasn't really shown either that they can do great Marvel lands or great Marvel updates. Yes, Cosmic Rewind and Mission Breakout were good as individual attractions, but I will say that Avengers Campus, while Spider-Man is a fine attraction, and I love all the characters they brought in, but we don't need that again in Florida. If they want to do individual attractions, that's cool. I don't want Tower of Terror replaced, but at the Hollywood Studios and other areas, even if they wanted to do an update better than the Paris one for Rock and Roller Coaster, I wouldn't hate it. But to me, Spaceship Earth, like so many have said, is already so far along that to me, I don't think you need to overthink it and try and gut it and start over and bring in Marvel or do anything like that. I think it can be a testament to like living with the land. It can be a testament to great elements of the past with the park while they continue to, when things are completely closed, finding new ways. Like, I appreciate that the new test track with a sponsor is not doing some sort of IP overlay, and I hope that they will consider Figment a strong enough IP to not have to do some other overlay for Imagination. But I appreciate the idea, and I don't think it's crazy. If they really did it to the best way and focused on STEM and did everything they could do that made it the coolest thing ever, I still don't want to see it in Spaceship Earth, but for Epcot the park, okay. I'm not being just a traditionalist. I think there are ways it could be done super well, but then there are also ways that could be done very poorly. Well, I'm going to play another clip now. This is from Courtney and Emily of the Book of the Mouse Club podcast. They do a great job interviewing authors, diving into Disney books, have a lot of great guests. I was on the show once. I've had them on this show if you want to look back to the past. But just the way they dig into Disney's books, I think, is really fun because there's a lot of great books being written. They basically did a combo with Brett Nachman of Notably Disney where they went through Jim Cora's book and Dick News's book on their two podcasts. Both of those are really cool. You should definitely check out. And Brett is going to have a comment that I'll play in a bit. But here we go. They're going to talk about the post show, which I think we're at the right point to talk about that. Here are Courtney and Emily of Book of the Mouse Club.
Hello, this is Courtney
and Emily
from Book of the Mouse Club podcast.
Thank you for inviting us back for some more armchair Imagineering. We were really excited you wanted to think about reimagining Spaceship Earth because we love this Epcot icon. We're sure everyone has great ideas for updating the attraction, so we thought we'd focus on the post-show portion of the attraction's exit.
Yeah, Emily, when you brought up the idea of focusing on the post-show, I thought that was brilliant and that it would be fun for each of us to come up with something. I have fond memories of my visits in the early 90s, back when AT&T sponsored the attraction. Back then, there was a giant phone that you could make free calls on and interactive elements like a simulator platform. Then, in 2007, Siemens took over the sponsorship and added the interactive games that are still available today when they're working, despite the end of their sponsorship a decade later in 2017. As of right now, there is no current sponsor. I do feel that sponsorships are essential to the attraction's success. We're seeing the benefits of sponsorship at Test Track with the recently announced update thanks to Chevrolet. The current post-show is over 15 years old, so it's definitely time to breathe new life into it. I'd personally like to go back to the attraction's communication roots and lean into the boundless future that Epcot wants to project. So I think a sponsorship from Apple or maybe Meta, the parent company of Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, would be a really good fit for that communication, but also technology theme. I've always enjoyed when post shows featured free digital souvenirs or activities. For example, you could take a picture and film a video at Mission Space and send it as an email postcard or create digital art at the Imagination Pavilion. And these would be easy additions and fun ways of making memories. With technology's advancements, there could probably be opportunities for like a virtual reality or augmented reality station to be featured as well. There's definitely a lot of potential for this post show space. So what were you thinking, Emily?
I really love that idea. Sponsors served such a big part of Disney's history, and why not bring that back? And my family always took a photo at the kiosk at the Imagination Pavilion when I was a kid, and experiences like that kept us in the show building for probably an extra 30 minutes. And that additional time makes the attraction feel more special while also helping to handle crowds. And I think we can do that here too with the Spaceship Earth post-show. I think we could use this post-show to further connect World Celebration, this new updated future world, to World Showcase at the rear of the park. I love the globe that we currently see when we exit Spaceship Earth, so everyone can see where everyone's visiting Epcot that day. I think we should keep that concept as the focal point, but like you said, with the technology, it's been 15 years. It's time to update that tech, and sponsorships and interactive activities you mentioned, I think, could really elevate this. And if we're going to keep with the spirit of communication, I think those interactive activities could connect us as well to World Showcase and the parts of the park that guests usually visit in the second half of their day. They can use those activities maybe to learn conversational phrases in other languages, learn cultural norms, maybe take virtual walks through other countries. And then you can take those experiences and things you learn to interact with cast members in the World Showcase. Additionally, I think we can update the current DuckTales World Showcase Adventure, formerly Kim Possible and Agent P's World Showcase Adventure, to connect with the interactive activities and sponsorships that you imagined. So you're taking what you learned in the pavilion and bringing it back into the rest of the park. The game and other World Showcase themed interactivities together under that powerhouse sponsorship, I think would serve as like an orientation center to World Showcase. to elevate what the current port of entry tries to do, but really only gives us some gift shops. I see the new Epcot updates returning to edutainment of the original Epcot of the 80s, and I want this space to do that while also connecting us to the rest of the park. Spaceship Earth is the unifying icon of Epcot, and a well-themed and interactive post show could elevate this purpose.
I love that a lot. I think both of our ideas combined are a idea that is as well-rounded as Spaceship Earth herself. So thank you, Dan.
And happy Imagineering, everybody.
Thanks, Courtney and Emily. It's interesting that I've spent the past hour going on about how we don't need a sponsor for Spaceship Earth, but both of them came up with really great reasons why a sponsor would be helpful, including, like I mentioned, with Test Track, that they have found a way to give a good update to an attraction because Chevrolet is involved. And there likely is a sponsor that could allow for Spaceship Earth to continue to do well. And I like the idea of having the sponsor, though, if we have one, be more involved with the post show rather than having as much involvement in the attraction itself. And there are a lot of ways, like, the post show areas of especially Imagination, where the keyboards rarely work. And I've sent pictures of myself that don't appear anymore, where that would need a huge update. That even Project Tomorrow has seen better days, and there could definitely be some changes there to make it somewhere people want to hang out in and interact with. And especially what I like is connecting it to other things you're doing in the park, especially in World Showcase, in other pavilions. You can make it more about, not just about, here's a small way to use a little time after we ride an attraction, but this connects to our overall day at the park, especially given how smartphones are now, or just with all the various technologies that can be used, it should be pretty easy. I'm always hesitant about the post shows because I feel like, do people not spend much time in the post shows because they're terrible or dated? Or is it because just our minds and our approaches with our phones and our go attitude have just made it where we don't want to spend time there? Because I find myself doing that sometimes. I think with the Great Post Show, people would spend time there, especially locals or people returning. I think a lot of it is just that people aren't as interested. And you do see people in Test Tracks and they spending some time in the post show. But overall, I think the best thing to do is to make an update. And of course, a sponsor can always help with that. Thanks, Courtney and Emily. We have several more audio clips to play. Before I do that, here's a comment from Lauren Stanishevsky, who's been on the show twice, talking about trips she took. She gave me a review of Cosmic Rewind the last time she did that, and just a lot of information about visiting Walt Disney World, and has been a great guest, also really into the music. Here's her comment. Spaceship Earth is one of my absolute favorite attractions and has been ever since my first trip in 2000. To me, Spaceship Earth and Epcot as a whole have been an embodiment and celebration of mankind, celebrating the work that has gone into the evolution and expression of man through time and across cultures while looking ahead in anticipation of the great things to come. In general, I feel as though Spaceship Earth and Epcot as a park has shifted its focus away from these principles, and I'd love to see them go back to this, as I think the world desperately needs more of the optimism for the future that Epcot used to embrace. More specifically for Spaceship Earth, I would love to see the updated sets and points in history that are worthy of celebration across the globe. Inventions, grand moments progressing toward peace, moments that truly embrace the ideals in which Epcot was founded. While Spaceship Earth in the past has primarily been based around communications, I think it would be appropriate as the icon of the park and in the spirit of celebrating points in history that have helped improve the quality of life for mankind as a whole to perhaps open the focus of Spaceship Earth a little to other historic moments worth celebrating. Similarly to the World Fairs that played a role in inspiring Epcot, I would love to see historic moments from around the world to celebrate human achievement, advancement, knowledge, peace, and generosity that could inspire us all. Perhaps another possible route for Spaceship Earth would be to have it acknowledge the original pavilions in Epcot, showcasing achievements in medicine, energy, motion, space, seas, agriculture, invention, imagination, etc. Regarding the hardware of the attraction, I definitely want to see it stay as an on-air attraction, but it'd be wonderful to have updated technologies for the ride system it sets that truly showcase what is possible with technologies at this moment. The one thing I want to zone in on here is the idea of opening up the concept of Spaceship Earth to celebrate human achievement. Now, I think that's great. Obviously, Disney would probably use that as an opportunity to celebrate their movies. But also, too, the idea of zoning in on some of the other early pavilions. Because I think about in the old Earth Station post-show, you would go in there and they would have this running animated screen where it would show the other pavilions and show little clips. And I'd be like, this is exciting. And I would stand there and watch it. You can find those online. They're very cool. So in that post show, you could do that. And, I don't know, if you're focusing more on human achievement, there is a way with this attraction to kind of zone in on these other areas. Now, with us still having mission space and living with the land and the seas and everything, but if it could be smaller nods that almost like provide like a preview of those attractions, especially if Nemo could go. But overall, I think that could be cool. Like Spaceship Earth is the centerpiece of Epcot. And then there's these other areas that we also are going to focus on, including World of Motion with transportation, a test track, now that basically Spaceship Earth is kind of the entry point to a lot more, which I think is very cool. Thank you, Lauren. All right, now we're going to play a clip by Tim Grassi of the Marty Called podcast, the second of 3 from those hosts. And Tim has a lot of different ideas and talks about Spaceship Earth, so let's dive right in and listen to Tim.
Hello, Dan and the Tomorrow Society listeners. It's your least favorite, most frequent guest, Tim Grassi here, to give you a way too long rundown of what's needed at Spaceship Earth. To start, it needs a new script, a new narrator, and a new finale. It may need a replacement to the ride system as well, but that's not for me to determine. I think that the biggest thing for me, though, is that it absolutely 100% needs to remain an attraction about communication. Making an attraction about communication the centerpiece of Future World took incredible foresight, and that theme should absolutely remain. As for the ride itself, for the physical sets on the Ascent, I don't think it really needs significant changes. I'd keep all the sets the same up through the garage computer scene. I will add the horseback and the Rome projection, and the unknown Egyptian should finally be making contact with the paper that he is pounding to make the reeds flat. Also, Michelangelo should actually be painting. But for me, the Descent is clearly the problem. Getting rid of that jib-jab cartoon at the end. I want to remove the monitors entirely on top of the seats. If you want to keep them for language selection at a lower point on the seat, fine. Move them down and then turn them off, or come up with something more primitive to come up with a language selection. I think that's a good idea for an attraction like that that's a centerpiece of the park. But I think that the screens definitely need to be less intrusive than they currently are, and you shouldn't rely on the screens for the Descent. The other thing that really bothered me about the Judi Dench version when it first came out is the timing of the line on this, our Spaceship Earth, needs to coincide with the reveal of Earth. On previous versions, this was actually a goosebump moment of the ride, and it's a very subtle thing, but it's a big thing, and they messed it up. And it's been that way since the Judi Dench version started. I do think that historically, when Epcot has tackled a topic, they look at the history of that topic and then suggest the future of that topic. And that's where you get into problems and need to continue to update things. So they technically did that with a cartoon, but it became dated almost immediately. And I think we need to acknowledge that it is impossible to totally future-proof this, but they can do a better job of it. Simple things. LED lighting. That's something that I guess they have it in spots, but you can change the colors of it. You can make it a little bit more unique, have a lot more flexibility with lighting nowadays. I think we should also focus on different attributes of communication, perhaps the distances we can communicate with transmissions from far beyond our solar systems. There should be a focus on how we communicate citing handheld and wearable technology, things like that have evolved recently. But if you look at how we communicate and the distance of which we can communicate as the primary centerpieces of this futurism, that might give a little bit of future-proofing. As for the new script and narrator, I don't mind a script that's lighter than the Jeremy Irons or Walter Cronkite versions, but the Judi Dench version was a bit of an overcorrection on that front. I wouldn't mind some lightheartedness to it, or even some slightly different narrations that include similar messages where, you're not necessarily sure what iteration of it you're going to get. I'm kind of thinking might even be better with like a couple. If you go back to Horizons, you had a husband and a wife go through it, and that would be a way of not necessarily tying it to a individual, but rather just some actors and actresses that may be unknown. But if you are going to stick with a single person, the most obvious candidates I've heard, just from a fan perspective, would be somebody like Morgan Freeman or Patrick Stewart, somebody that has a distinctive voice. But if you want to look at a younger voice, there are some people in the fold as familiar character voices. It can include somebody like Tom Hanks, Robert Downey Jr., Scarlett Johansson. Tom Hanks isn't much younger than those two. But anyway, those were other options that I thought of as well. But I kind of like the idea of somebody not famous on this next iteration. But I do think that the overarching theme at the end of it should be about communication. Focus on, no matter how far apart we are or how we communicate, that we continue to communicate, because it is the best thing we do. It solves our problems and advances our society. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. I like hearing another mention of the unknown Egyptian not touching the paper after Bethany earlier. Good job. And also, too, his point about the timing of the reveal of Spaceship Earth is a great one. It kind of relates to what Martin Smith said in terms of that, how things were up there with the long pathway. But he didn't mention specifically the narration. But yeah, it's some elements when you have an attraction like this that is slow moving, that has an omni mover, that, can ultimately turn, face the screen and everything else with narration. Timing is crucial. So that's a great point to bring up. And in terms of the narration, I like a lot of his ideas, and even the one about it maybe not being someone famous. They kind of did that, with the People Mover, where I was the voice. I'm like, this is a familiar voice, but not someone I really know. Or if we even think about World of Motion with, Gary Owens, people didn't really know him that well. Or even the original Spaceship Earth was kind of that way. Not that these weren't accomplished individuals, but they weren't, you don't immediately kind of get taken out of it and possibly influenced by your feelings about a particular person. Now, Judi Dench, I don't feel like has a lot of haters, but just overall, you could have a case if you had a new narrators where somebody's like, oh, I don't really like that person or whatever, which granted, I'm not that concerned about, but it's just something to think about. And then Tim brought up a lot of similar points. I also like his emphasis on keeping a communication, because I think the thought when you're going to update it is to look at it and say, like Disney was going to do with storytelling, we need to make it something different. Now, there are some cool ideas for how to update it, but communication still works, and especially on the Ascent. And I think if we kind of go with what I talked about with bringing back some of the sets and updating them for the Descent, that also fits really well with communication. So thanks for that, Tim. So Richard Hebel, he sent a very significant email with a lot of updates. And I know we're getting a bit long here, so I'm going to mention a lot of them, but I don't think I'm just going to read the whole thing. So I'm going to pinpoint things that haven't been talked about yet that I thought would be interesting. He mentions getting sponsorship from someone like SpaceX or Starlink. SpaceX, well, we'll see. But he also mentioned ride vehicles with larger screens and a more futuristic look that is based on the sponsor, like a spaceship for SpaceX. Well, I'm interested in them updating the ride vehicle's look, if that's what they're going to focus on, but I also don't want to focus too much just on space. So I think that could be a little interesting, because he even talks, though, kind of related to where he talks about updating the entrance with a futuristic spaceship that contains a time machine. Now, granted, I like the idea of making it feel more like a time machine. And then he says you're entering the attraction to the airlock of a ship. So he's really zoning into kind of the futuristic look there. And the time machine idea, you think about like the ride vehicles on Time Traveler. Now, granted, this would not be a spinning coaster, but that kind of theming, though I know that's steampunk, but with a lot of lights and everything else, I thought that was super interesting. I hadn't thought much about making updates to the look of the ride vehicle. I would like to make it more comfortable, but just overall in terms of the look, that is very cool. So, he goes through each individual scenes. He talks about in the Egyptians adding a pyramid to the background, kind of like in the World Showcase Mexico Pavilion, which I think is very cool. And then as we go further along, he wants to update the effect in the Renaissance that as the painting has been done, it becomes more complete on the ceiling, which I think is a really cool idea, kind of fitting with what Tim just said about having him actually paint. He mentions adding a section about automobiles and transportation, which in the Age of Invention, I don't know, because again, we still have Test Track and everything else. He also wants the scene with the paperboy to have Walt Disney involved, since he delivered papers when he was young, and a section about Disney history and the company. I like that idea. I think it's really inventive, clever, the idea with Walt Disney as the paperboy, though you'd have to find some way with the narrator or something to explain that is Walt Disney. And you could talk about the history of Disney, but I would also not want to make it about adding too much IP. They did already have things like visuals of Snow White and everything, so there's a way you could do it briefly with talking about Disney without making it seem like wow, Disney is so cool. Now, jumping ahead to the spaceship, he said, add SpaceX rockets and the International Space Station in the dome. I love the idea of adding the dome and even, rockets and everything. I'm still hesitant on SpaceX just because of the Elon Musk factor, though I know a lot of people don't connect that to him. But again, and then, he also talks in Earth Station about SpaceX and Tesla tech. Now, let's just separate Elon Musk from it. I think in theory, the idea of a company that is focusing on space travel and exploration and updated technology is great. So I think a lot of these updates kind of fit with what I want to see with the futuristic approach to it. And then he also talks, interestingly, he wants to keep the descent interactive, but he connects it to Horizons, allowing us to pick our ending, make it more interactive. They're going to pick their ending, and then you could basically, it says, walk around land, sea, and space homes in the future. I don't know how you do that when you're on your ride, but maybe I'm not totally understanding. But there's just a lot of great ideas here from Richard. Richard, thank you for so much information and for all the cool ideas. But I do really kind of zone in on the idea of making this more like you're really going back in time with your ride vehicles and how you enter. That could make this feel more like a journey and adventure, and that would also fit perfectly with the kind of updates to the space station and everything that goes there. All right, I'm going to play one that's kind of off the wall. This is from Mark Thompson, and he has some ideas that basically retheming the attraction entirely. Now, I don't know if any of this is tongue-in-cheek, but I obviously don't want to assume it is. I think it does connect to having a sponsor and also just takes the attraction in a completely different direction. So I'm just going to let Mark explain it. Here is Mark Thompson.
Hi, this is Mark from the Disney Space Podcast, or at 6 miles tall on X, Blue Sky, or Threads. And I want to overhaul Spaceship Earth into an updated attraction I call Earthmind. Earthmind is the first iconic pavilion and attraction that we see upon rope dropping Epcot early in the morning. And since this is the first attraction of our day, we are going to embark upon a time travel journey experiencing the history of caffeine. We enter the pavilion as we do today. The entrance mural is the same, but we see a sign that reads Earthmine, presented by Starbucks and Godiva Chocolates. We enter and board our time machines, and as we rise through the tunnel, we see tiny neural synapses all around us, pulsing softly in waves as if we're sleeping in a dream. We reach the top where the narration begins. We see hooved animals walking around at midnight, eating berries off bushes. It was here where early man noticed that something keeps the animals awake at night, and so man would try it too. Then we see an unknown Ethiopian pounding beans that will be used for a special concoction. The grounds will eventually be used to help leaders of civilizations focus their thoughts and form civil order. North Africa's favored psychotropic exciter drug becomes valuable, and beans are distributed across the Mediterranean. The Phoenicians who deliver them have newfound focus that allows them to form an alphabet. The ancient Greeks consume new coffees and teas, which enable their minds to focus and form new philosophies, mathematics, and science. They establish schools where the students also consume coffees and teas daily. Caffeine is changing the world. Lessons learned from the Greeks, the Romans also consume coffees and teas and create a powerful empire. But with excessive consumption of wines, ales, and ciders to purify their drinking waters, Rome falls and burns. The ashes of civil drunkenness is Europe's doom. As it turns out, Arab and Jewish scholars consume Middle Eastern coffees and teas and preserve information lost by Rome and Alexandria. Our dreams of the future are saved thanks to caffeine. Here in Europe, favored caffeine beverages allows monks to toil endlessly to copy books by hand, but that is about to change. In 1450, Gutenberg invents the movable type printing press. Now entire populations consuming coffee can order copies and read well into the night. Coffee and books create an explosion of knowledge and innovation we call the Renaissance, and caffeine leads the way. New philosophies and inventions are made along the way, including the invention of chocolate making. The exotic cocoa treats were called the food of the gods. Now mankind on caffeine races headlong into the future. Focused minds create world-changing technologies, machines, newspaper presses, electronic communications, telephones, and here at the cinemas, chocolate treats allow patrons to enjoy fantastic moving stories and fresh newsreels after dark. A world of energetic minds leads to something grand, a small step for man, and one giant leap for mankind. And once these great achievements were practiced, once we had a firm recognition of our thinking, morning, our caffeinated minds create another great achievement. We created electronic minds, machines that could perform tasks on their own. Late-night coffee breaks allows us to see the potential. And in a garage in California, late at night, coffee in hand, young people with a passion for shaping the future put electronic minds in everyone's hands. Together, we create a super network that glows with billions of interactions. And again, we stand on a brink of a new renaissance. Caffeine creates Earth Mind. And as we reach the top of the structure, we see millions of sparkling points of lights all dancing in patterns, waves moving all around the space. These are our active neurons reflecting our new genius thanks to caffeine. As we descend, points of light begin to focus in and expand. We can see these points expand and become people. Each neuron is an individual person, people doing their various brilliant things. The world itself, thanks to caffeine, has quickly become Earth Mind. And on our time machine screens, we can pre-order coffees and chocolates and teas. When we exit, we enter Mind Station, where we can pick up our pre-order coffee concoctions from a Starbucks counter or chocolate pastries from a Godiva counter. Now, with our awakened and focused minds, we are ready to experience the vastness of Epcot and expand our minds further.
First of all, I just want to give a big kudos to Mark for just the way that he connects all the different scenes of Spaceship Earth to caffeine is really fun. And I think clever, the fact that he, found ways to connect Rome and even the age of invention and technology and everything to that is really fun. I don't even know really how to approach this as an idea that could happen. If Starbucks really, they have a lot of presence in Disney, really wanted this to happen, you never know. But I think, I think it's a fun idea, Mark, that I really appreciate the submission and would love to hear what any of you think about it too. Just because, a lot of us focused on similar things like, oh, we need to update the Descent or bring back this or bring back that. And Mark took just a completely different idea that I think really fun to me. I enjoy it when we look at attractions and the way they're set up and take just a very different approach. And I say this as someone who's probably going to go drink some more coffee in a little bit. Caffeine does play a role in a lot of our lives, whether it's positive or negative, I'm not sure, but it has been involved in kind of especially our modern world, but going back for a long time. So thank you, Mark. All right. Well, now I did get some thoughts from Brett Nachman of the Notably Disney podcast. Again, Brett talks to a lot of cool guests, authors, composers, musicians, other theme park fans. I've been on a few times, does a great job. I would highly recommend you check it out. Again, this is one where I'm going to summarize a little bit, but I definitely want to get into a lot of it. Here's something. Perhaps most importantly, I think those time machines require some further comfort. Could Disney add some cushions to the vehicles to make the 10,000-year journey a softer one? That would especially be welcome during the descent. I would not significantly change Bruce Broughton's magnificent score on most of the scenes leading up to the finale, as they worked effectively in sharing the history of human communication. On a past episode of Notably Disney, I contended that Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey would make fantastic narrators, especially based on the power they have in connecting with humans, whether they via their writing or interviews. I still believe they are ideal choices for leading Spaceship Earth into a new era. Clearly, the ending scenes are what needs the most work. I suggest finding ways to illustrate the possibilities of human communication in the present day via video screens, projections, and even a few audio animatronics if appropriate. They could showcase everything from how video conferencing has allowed families to connect with one another across continents, akin to the scene that Jeremy Irons' version had, to ways social media allows for healthy and encouraging conversation about modern issues. I can see how neon lighting or projection mapping could visualize examples of conversations that happen across the world in real time. Space is a big part of the attraction, so why not depict the important messages and insights that astronauts on the International Space Station send back home to us on planet Earth? The ride vehicle screens with quizzes on envisioning the future would be better saved for an updated version of the Project Tomorrow's post-show. Instead, I feel those screens could be leveraged to showcase pioneers in human communication beyond those featuring the attraction, from figures like Gandhi and Nelson Mandela to Stephen Hawking and Greta Thunberg. These political figures, scientists, authors, and storytellers all demonstrate what the power of sending positive messages to the world can accomplish, much in a way the finale to the American Adventure honors important individuals in our nation's history. Although I recognize these ideas require further finessing, they would elevate the disappointing ending that does not stand a candle to the Jeremy Irons version. I look forward to hearing other podcast listeners' thoughts. Thanks. Well, Brett, these are a lot of great ideas, and especially zoning in on, again, first on the narration, using someone like Oprah Winfrey or Michelle Obama. They could be very good, and I think we could add them to kind of the list of people that others have included that I think would make excellent narrators. And I also agree, we haven't talked much about Bruce Broughton's score, but I think it's very strong. I think there might be a way to kind of also zone in some of the past scores that have been used and kind of mix it together along with Tomorrow's Child. But I think Bruce Broughton did an excellent job on that score for sure. And then talking about the post-show, the idea too of having kind of looking at the future instead of doing it in the descent, finding a way to do it in the post-show is great. And then he references a lot of figures that we could showcase pioneers and human communication. Doing that instead of just like this animated vision your future, I think is a great idea. So thank you, Brett, for all those really cool ideas. And now I'm going to read one more. My final kind of Dan reads someone's entry here, and then we have one more audio clip after that. This is from Chris Ewan. I would theme Spaceship Earth to be about people changing the world through ingenuity and passion. This way we can largely keep the classic scenes on the way up, with perhaps some tweaked dialogue and some new animatronics to represent specific individuals along the way. And then we can redo the way down to be a showcase of 20th and 21st century folks who made a difference. Perhaps be a light show, projections, mirrors, the occasional animatronic diorama, and an updated soaring or orchestral version of Tomorrow's Child. The idea is to keep Spaceship Earth inspirational and grand without relying too heavily on a particular vision of the future that might become outdated, or doing something cynical or marketing adjacent like focusing on storytelling. The exhibit at the end could be a series of hands-on exhibits about inventors and reformers of the world. Maybe you have some chemistry-themed stuff over by George Washington Carver and Marie Curie, etc. With the right score, narrator, and repaired ride system, no more clickety-clackety-clack. I feel like Spaceship Earth can be restored to a long-standing classic that belongs at the front of Epcot. Side idea, former Earth Station could also be used as a new Epcot People Mover station that would take people around the edge of World Showcase at water level with stops at various places along the lagoon. The tracks could be just below the water surface so as not to affect the view. Epcot would then stand for every person comes out totally entertained by People Mover. All one word there. Okay, I got to talk about that last one first. That is amazing. I love that idea. They actually had a similar idea with Westcott, where they were going to have like this transportation system that took you around through each country. It was very complicated. It wasn't a people mover. It was like a boat, I believe. Tony Baxter has talked a lot about it, particularly on his bonus season pass podcast. But I love the idea of having a people mover in Epcot. There were plans initially with the Communicore area to have a people mover, but to have it come from the back of Spaceship Earth there, put it right through that new area next to Communicore Hall and everything, and then around World Showcase, it allows people to get out where they need to at certain spots. You might not want to do it at every country, but 3 or 4 stops I think is brilliant, especially given the increased temperatures and just it gets hotter in the summer and Epcot gets really tiring. To have some way you could travel around, I think would be super popular, and also a fun way to get a different view of the park and also a nice view really close to World Showcase Lagoon. Some of his other ideas actually mirror some things that Brett said about focusing more on historical figures, especially in the post-show. But I also like the idea of focusing on some 20th and 21st century folks who made a difference in the descent. Now, granted, you could run into the situation. I even thought of this with some, people are, if you get somebody that I think of as being just universally beloved, and then people come out and say, actually, I don't agree with this person or whatever. So you could run into that, but there are figures that kind of, especially if you go back a bit, that most people seem to agree were involved, especially in terms of achievements rather than like a famous historical figure like a president. Here you could have people that have done technological achievements, which I think is awesome. So thank you so much, Chris. Okay, one last clip. I'm going to play one from Skipper Ben. Skipper Ben Rebstock, formerly of Inside the Magic, not the current version, the original version with Ricky Briganti, now the Marty Called podcast. And he has some ideas of something we have not talked about yet, but I think are very cool. So take it away. Let's finish us off here, Skipper Ben.
Hey, Dan, Skipper Ben here from the Marty Called podcast. I'm the good-looking host of the three of us on that show. Thanks for letting me call in with my idea for Spaceship Earth updating. Now that Tim's probably bored the hell out of you on his idea with whatever dumb thing he wants to do to like turn Spaceship Earth back into something that would have been in 1984 Epcot. Let me bring us up to speed with something cool, new, and modern. And no, I don't mean putting a roller coaster in there, although I wonder if that's ever been talked about. Now that I think about it, that could be a good idea, but we'll save that for the next time you do this in a few years. Mine is going to be left field, though, just out of left field, and it all has to do with a building that's kind of built the same way that's on the other side of the country in Las Vegas, and that's the Las Vegas Sphere. And what they've done with the inside of that thing with the digital screen inside of that structure, the videos that have come out from the U2 concert are just mind-blowing. It is an amazing feat of technology. It's an amazing experience for people who have been there. I know somebody who has been to one of the shows, and it's just like the greatest thing he has ever done in his life. I want to go do this so bad. And granted, what they did with it is a concert venue. It is a musical venue. It's set up for shows, and we couldn't do that with our Spaceship Earth. But what if there was a way to gut that thing and recreate something inside there that was maybe a slow-moving attraction that went along a track that maybe utilized some of that technology in there? I have no idea if that would work, but my God, I would love to try to figure out and see if it does. If not, maybe we just gut it, do put some seats in there, and it does become a planetarium kind of fun experience. I don't know, but I do love Spaceship Earth as it is right now. I think updating it with new, bringing it to the modern age, some of the new technologies that we've had over the last 15, 20 years, bringing that along. If it does stay somewhat the way that it is right now, I like the early parts of the ride and the callbacks to history, but I do think there's some stuff left to be desired at the top that brings us up to speed a little bit more with what our world has turned into. And of course, like every other person on here, they're probably talking about the descent needing to be updated, and my God, that is the thing that needs to be updated maybe most at Walt Disney World in any attraction. So even if they didn't touch anything until you got to the descent and they decided to do a whole new storyline and scenes on your way back down, that would be fantastic, and I would love it, and it would be money well spent and really bring some new life to that attraction, because I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little tired of Jib Jab. I see enough of that on my phone and on my on my computer box already right now. That Jib Jab's amazing stuff, but it's time to get with the speed. Let's maybe do some TikToks on our way down. That's it. Spaceship Earth, brought to you by TikTok. It's an attraction that can easily be updated with new scenes, new technologies added to it, because technology is always changing. Give us a new narrator. I'm going to throw out there, how about Captain America himself, Chris Evans? I think he'd be a great narrator for this attraction. Give us a new ending, and if you don't want to do any of that, just gut the thing, and let's make a digital screen experience in there similar to the Sphere in Las Vegas, and have a lot of fun inside. Maybe we can put the Eat to the Beat concert series inside there and do some awesome rock concerts. Anyway, Dan, I love the show. Thanks for asking me to do this. I hope these ideas weren't too stupid, and they find it a bit amusing, and your listeners like it. At least one listener will like it, because that'll be me listening to your show when you release this. Have a great day, everyone. Dan, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Ben. When I hear gut the inside and put in a planetarium, my first thought is to raise up and be like, no, don't do it. And I do feel that way, not to do it. But I will say, I have not watched that much of the Sphere in Vegas. I have heard it's really cool. What I kind of grab from that as much as anything, from what Ben is saying, is that's like a new technology that has a lot of buzz that people are interested in. And especially in the top of the dome, when you get up there, or in the descent or somewhere else, Disney right now, Spaceship Earth, and actually a lot of their attractions aren't generating that same buzz in terms of being like attractions that really push the envelope with technology. Rise of the Resistance is very impressive. Flight of Passage was impressive. But Rise of Resistance a lot of times has some struggles with mechanical issues and everything else. But regardless, when you have your top attraction or your iconic attraction in your future thinking, forward thinking, whatever you want to call it, Discovery Park, whatever it is, especially in the front, it would be great to show some really cool technologies that rank up there with kind of the most exciting things out there, especially inside such a cool structure like Spaceship Earth. I cannot get behind the gutting of the inside and all that. And I know some of it is said in jest, like the TikTok sponsorship and everything else. The core of what Ben's getting to, I think, makes a lot of sense to me. The idea that if we're going to do some updates, yes, we got to update the descent. Everybody basically agrees on that. No one said keep it the same. That was 0% of the people said keep the descent the same. But I will say, whatever they do with the descent on the top, they need to work on the technology itself. So we did it. We got through every idea, including mine with Spaceship Earth, in quite a good amount of time. But still, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Just to summarize, if Disney is looking to there's various steps. First step, maintenance, make sure it runs well, make sure the vehicles run well, the air conditioning's fixed, all that. Step 2, the descent, and fixing all that, making it something new. Touchscreens aren't a big thing. If you get to the third phase, it would be the top and the sphere and making up to that. It might actually want to rope that together with the descent. And then, of course, add the chariot. You do all those things, Disney, I think we're in pretty good position. And then if we're really going to stretch, it's called like updating animatronics, making some of the other changes we talked about, even thematic changes, bigger updates. But if Disney can do those first kind of 3 or 4 things, I think we're definitely heading in the right direction. And there's a lot of variations to that I really enjoyed. But in terms of summarizing it up, I think that's it. Well, I know we've been going for a while. I'm going to keep this ending very short. I just want to say thanks to everyone for participating. If you'd like to check out any of the podcasts from the guests that I had, like Very Amusing and Marty Called and Book of the Mouse Club, so many more, I will have links to all of those in the show notes. Thanks to all of you who are listeners, who submitted your ideas, audio clips, or emails, or social media, or whatever. That's awesome. If you'd like to get a hold of me, email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. If you'd like to check out past episodes of the show, they're all out there on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast, or you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/podcast with the S at the end. If you like this kind of show, we've also done past episodes on Dinoland USA, Tomorrowland at Disneyland, the full parks of Epcot and Disney's Hollywood Studios. So a lot of fun there, plus plenty of cool interviews. Also wanted to give a quick shout out to Eric Hershey, who left a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. He said, "Great podcast that's easy to listen to, provides a ton of insights from the experts." Thanks so much, Eric. I really appreciate that. If you're enjoying the show and could submit a review and a 5-star rating, that's awesome and really helps to spread the word about the show. You can follow me on all the typical social media channels at Tomorrow Society or Tomorrow SOC on Twitter. I always love to hear with you. I would love to hear what you think of this episode. The music you're hearing right now is written by Adam Hookey, performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I'll be talking once again with Mary Kwiatkowski about Busch Gardens Williamsburg. We are focusing on their latest edition, the Dar Coaster. We also dig into the history, like the Curse of Dark Castle, which was a really cool dark ride, similar vein to Spider-Man. We talk a lot about that, plus some upcoming changes they're making to their Loch Ness Monster Coaster. A lot more. It's always a lot of fun to talk to Mary and to dig into one of the coolest regional parks. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you're doing awesome out there, and I will talk to you again very soon.